Welcome back to Canadian Agriculture Unpacked. As usual, our contact information is on the screen. Please let us know if you'd like to talk about something, you would like us to talk about something, or if you have an issue with what we have talked about, just avail yourself of that contact information. I welcome back Wayne Easter, longtime MP, 28 years, former Attorney General, and former longtime chair of the House of Commons Finance Committee, and Jack Wilkinson, a tour de force in Canadian agricultural policy, former president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, former president of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, former president of the International Federation of Agriculture, now known as the World Farmer Organization, and recently retired as a director on Canadian cooperatives. Welcome back, gentlemen. Listen, we need to talk about what is going on. What is the new reality in the world trade order with all the tariffs that the U.S. administration is imposing around the world, but also threatening Canada with further tariffs? Something doesn't make sense. He was talking about reciprocal tariffs. A reciprocal tariff to me would mean if we import beef from the U.S. and we charge a 20% tariff, then they could charge a 20% tariff if we export beef to them. And then, of course, we might as well go down to zero. And that's effectively what we have with CUSMA. Yeah. So where are we at? Where are we at with negotiation? Do we negotiate with someone that doesn't give a rat's ass about trade rules? Anyway, gentlemen, let's have at it. Jack, go ahead.
Well, for me, Bob, the major problem is what you just kind of ended your comment on. We've negotiated a WTO. We made concessions to get market share. Everybody signed off. And during that time period, every country had the right to challenge any of the tariff numbers we put forward. For example, supply management tabled all its numbers. There were X number of days that any country could challenge. No one did. So I'm tired of the U.S. whining about our high tariff numbers because they dropped the ball and didn't do anything at the time period. Same thing occurred when we negotiated the Canada-U.S. deal. And so the problem we're sitting at, in all of those trade deals, any bilaterals, any other with Europe, all have a process. If you got a problem, here's how you resolve it. Here's the process for mediation. Bring your case forward. So we have a situation right now where the United States doesn't care about that. So do they care about any trade deal? So we've got to be very, very, very careful when you sit down and again to say, let's talk, not to give anything away if you don't trust your party on the other side. I'm okay with going to those negotiations and saying, here's a specific problem. Let's work to resolve it in a meaningful way. But to start again and make any more Canadian agriculture concessions to someone who can't keep the deal. Remember, he signed the last one in 2018, said it was the best deal anybody in the world could have ever negotiated it, and it was me. I did it, Mr. Trump. Well, now he's forgotten, and he wants to start again. So we've got to be very careful, and we've got to really analyze with other countries around the world, can you even negotiate with the United States under the current administration? Will they stick to the deal? And if so, what are going to be the penalty clauses so that he just doesn't wake up some morning and decide to go after another commodity?
I agree with everything Jack said, with the exception of one thing. He said the United States, maybe they dropped the ball. I think in that time period they negotiated with reason and facts, and there was nothing they could, in fact, argue on the supply management that would have made any sense. I do believe, and I think one of the realities where we're at the moment, we're almost looking at a new world order. There's so many countries in the world now believe you can't trust the United States. We'd signed agreements, as Jack said. Look at CUSMA, was signed by Trump. Now he's in fact breaking it. He's breaking all the other arrangements with the world. So when you don't have trust, you've got a real problem. So we may be looking at almost a new world order. And the difference between the way Trump negotiates and the way that you guys were involved in WTO in those negotiations, the whole idea behind those negotiations was to make it fair, yes, try and bring some equality into the system, but it was a strategy of win-win. Now with Trump, his strategy is only win-lose, and everybody else loses but him. That's his whole strategy. That's been a strategy in terms of the art of the deal. There's a winner and there's a loser. There's no this community idea or global idea of win-win in which you can work together. Everybody can make a livelihood, and progress will go on. I would underline all that by saying I really think where we need to be going is we kind of went into bilaterals over the last number of years, and I've been involved in some of that, whether it's with a small group of countries or a single country. We need to get back into more of the multilateral global negotiations where there's rules we all follow globally from my point of view. And the bottom line for us in the agriculture sector, farm gate prices matter. There has to be a way of strengthening the farm community worldwide, and producing from where we're efficient.
There's a couple of points I'd like to pick up on from what you guys mentioned. One is when you talk about strategy, I'm not certain that Trump has any strategy at all. But the other thing I don't think he understands is that when we export, say, agricultural products to the U.S., we are not forcing them to take it. There's nothing we can do to force it on them. They are importing those products because they need them. Does he not understand that?
Well, he obviously has to understand that at some level, but I think the part that I'm growing more and more to appreciate is the fact that it appears as if he responds to the last lobby group who met him in his office. So if I'm a cheese producer in Wisconsin and I come in and complain about the supply management in Canada, there's no kind of drill down and try and figure out what's that matter. What does that actually mean? I mean, are we actually keeping cheese out? Does he not appreciate that we've got zero in quota tariffs, that we've increased the amount of market access already that's coming in? Our producers are living the letter of the law of that trade deal, and it just never seems to get to that conversation level with them. It's the same as, like, how can you possibly attack the auto deal that's been running? The auto pack first, what did it start, about 64 or something like that? Then it rolled into the Canada-US trade deal, where a whole industry, every one of the CEOs is in the United States, all know how they build a car. But somehow the trade people in Trump's office don't understand how a car is built. So what's the value in punishing that integrated system the same way as you would punish, say, an electric vehicle from China? And that, I think, is the part that so many people are having trouble understanding. It appears as if it's just a simple dogma. I want all the jobs to come back to the United States. Everybody who wants to get into this market is going to pay. I don't care about any of the past deals. That's the way it'll be. But somebody needs to answer this basic question. The reason the toaster is built in China instead of the United States was it cost 15% of the value of building a toaster in the United States. So bring that toaster back home. Go ahead, build it with U.S. labor and see whether the consumer wants to pay $80 for the toaster instead of $20. I mean, that's the part he's not talking about. And I don't think he's understanding that things move to the benefit of the U.S. consumer by having these less expensive commodities brought into the country, and gave them incredible wealth. And they concentrated on those pieces they did well, as in building fighter airplanes and IT stuff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's an interesting point you just made, Jack. My guess, I've actually never met an American in our dealings with them, Jack, internationally, that understood the term comparative advantage. Yeah. And it is about competitiveness. You're right. Someone was musing, the other day about, well, if we start building, if the U.S. starts building cell phones in their country, who will they hire to screw in the hundreds of little screws that you screw into a cell phone? Is there anybody that's willing to do that? The reason why there's been a distribution of manufacturing and labor is for that reason. Wayne, what do you think?
Well, just one point, spinning off what was said earlier. If Trump wants to bring all these jobs back to the United States, where's the labor going to come from? They're having a labor problem on farms now. They're having a labor problem in certain industries. Number one, in a lot of these plants, you got to have labor. Yeah, there's going to be automation, but they don't have the labor to be able to do it. I just would underline the point of globalization has actually made United States prosperous.
Yeah.
His whole idea on trade deficits is so wrong. Because you got a trade deficit doesn't mean another country's taking advantage of you. It means, yes, they're moving perhaps more products into your country than you're moving into theirs, but you're getting advantages at the consumer level of all those efficiencies through the supply chain. You're getting advantage of all those efficiencies through the supply chain. And you look at the industries he's trying to break apart. Jack mentioned the automobile industry. Another industry that's really, really integrated is livestock, beef cattle, pork. We ship pork to their slaughter plants, but look at beef specifically. We have cow-calf operators here in Canada. The calves may go down to the U.S., they may be raised to stocker level in Canada and then go down to the U.S. to a feedlot. Some of them may come back here to be slaughtered. They may be slaughtered in U.S. plants, and some of them will be slaughtered in ours. It's an extremely integrated industries that creates efficiencies all along the way. And in building a car, an automobile, we do certain things better here in terms of our auto parts industry. They do certain things better there. They do certain things in Mexico better. And when you compile all that into one automobile, you got an automobile, a truck or a car that is cheaper than it would have otherwise have been, and it created jobs at all three levels. He is just so wrong in terms of how he's approaching this issue. And then there's the other whole issue. I'll bring it up again every time. There's the issue of trust. I mean, from my point of view, and I chaired Canada-US for years, and I've talked to some of my American colleagues, and I say, how can we trust the United States anymore? Like in terms of, we're looking at CF-18s, or we were, in terms of the defense industry. What happens if we have CF-18s and your president decides, well, we don't want to sell the parts to Canada anymore? What happens then? I mean, this is the reality of the world we're living in. When you lose trust with your trading partner, that you're depending on a supply chain, it's all over.
Well, and I mean, talking about renegotiating a trade agreement, I haven't seen anybody or heard anybody around immediately around Trump that would even be qualified to negotiate a trade agreement. And they typically replace the top 100 bureaucrats in any department when they have a new administration. Who is there that could effectively negotiate an agreement? Even if you look back at CUSMA. In agriculture, for example, not very much change. Canada actually gave up significant market access with expanded TRQs for supply management. We got a little back on sugar for Alberta sugar beet producers, but that's effectively the only change there was. They wouldn't even budge on meat reinspection. They wouldn't budge on that simply because the unions in those inspection stations were too strong. So really there wasn't much change there at all. And I can't see how actually in 26 that was supposed to be a review. No one ever talked about a renegotiation. It was simply meant to be a review to see if everybody was complying with the agreement that had been signed. Jack, go ahead.
Well, I think one point that I'd like both of you guys' opinion on. So here we are sitting right now. The election's over. Let's pretend the election's over. What should the farm community do in relationship to its advocacy to the federal government and the provincial government? And so for me, we designed all of these farm income support payments based on the rules that existed in WTO and also some countervail threats from the United States. So anything that could increase the risk of countervail, increase in any way, or decrease the flow of trade, the farm community said, we don't want to go there. That just doesn't make any sense. So let's design these programs all based on net farm income, based on all the rules that existed. Well, if it's true, if the WTO as we know it is over, what is the point of designing our farm income programs around rules that no longer are being played by? So I think the farm community needs to walk into the office with a couple of big problems. First of all, how are we going to keep our farms viable through this? And part of that will be the processing industry, depending how bad it gets and depending on what tariffs get thrown up. And then secondly, back to what we just got finished talking about, what are and is the path forward? Sure, we can put a lot of energy in East-West trade, and we sure should wherever we can. Sure, we should look at the European Union trade deal that we've already signed. I think there's a few countries that haven't ratified. Some of that makes sense for, some of our product as well. Probably look at Asia again and find out again what are markets there that we can really concentrate on, particularly if we've got a tariff wall going into the United States of, say, 25%. All of a sudden, all of those markets may be very profitable now, if you know what I mean, eh? But I think we need to, before we sit down and put anything on the table, we need to look at where we are at right now, what are the most critical issues in front of us, and then start to put a path forward plan in place on a multi-tiered approach.
Yeah, and there are those that are saying, well, we should just diversify our markets. But we touched on that in one of our last shows. You can diversify a certain amount, but face it, the U.S. is a great market for
Yep.
us if we can have it, right? It's much easier than shipping it to Europe or to any other country around the world.
Yeah.
Wayne.
Well, the bottom line on anything for the farm community as a starting point was we have to have viable farm incomes in this country. That has to be the uppermost thing in mind. In terms of a negotiation on the agriculture side, we have to have viable farm incomes at the end of the day. And if because of the trade actions that the United States is moving forward with, those viable incomes are not there under existing farm programs, then we have to match the programs that the United States is putting in place to protect their farm industry at the farm gate level. They do it. We don't. And as we've talked about before, Bob, there's lots of space in the WTO arrangement for us at least to do some of that. But the priority has to be in terms of making sure there's viable incomes at the farm community level. In terms of diversification, yes, it makes a whole lot of sense. But at the end of the day, in terms of that diversification, how much of that export dollar is going to come back and end up in the farmer's pocket? I mean, you've got the difficulty for us, especially in Western Canada, is you are so far from tidewater position. You got to cover those transportation costs. You have to have the transportation capabilities to get any product to market. I mean, right now, if you can imagine this, I chair the Atlantic Beef Products Incorporated board, which is the CFIA inspected beef plant in Borden, PI. We've opened up a market in Japan, and we're actually shipping beef products to Japan in containers. It makes sense the way we're doing it. We're actually getting a better price for products that Canadians don't see as high end, but the Japanese do. So we are making a buck on that. But that won't happen in every industry. Yeah. The other thing I think that we need to do more, and the governments need to be involved in, is how do we go to more value-added within their own industry. Somebody mentioned in a previous program biofuels. Maybe we have to look at that. Processing canola into canola. We have to assist the agri-food industry at that level as well to make sure that we're getting the most value out of our product back to the farm gate in Canada.
Well, you know, it's interesting you're talking about shipping beef into Japan. That's certainly where Canada would have a leg up if the U.S. plays silly with Japan on tariffs, right? Because we're part of the CPTPP, the U.S. is not. Now they have a bilateral with Japan, but if Trump blows that apart, then we would definitely have a competitive advantage in Japan on beef and probably on pork and many other things. Jack?
The problem with all of these things is, and I'm sure this is, if there is a strategy, my guess it's this, is it's disruptive. So now we're sitting in a situation where the disruption usually means, from a farm point of view, price goes down. Because the people around us don't take risks. They try and offset the risk to the farmer. So if they can buy my soybeans cheaper, if they can buy my wheat cheaper, that allows them flexibility to deal with the risks they may encounter. But it's the whole question of what happens when this administration in the United States is gone. Will we go back to a zero tariff world again? And so when we make investments in Canada, I'm not saying this is a reason not to do anything. I don't mean this at all. But when you talk about what's your long-term strategy, you really have to talk about what's your long-term strategy. You can't build a $5 or $6 million oil refinery if it's not going to be competitive in zero tariffs. We can't build a processing plant. We have got to say, if we're going to invest in this value add in Canada, we probably will end up protecting it to some degree with maybe some of our own tariffs for 10 years, as an example. Maybe it gets weaned down after the capital expenditure is paid for. But the last thing we want to do is massive investment in value add. All of a sudden, we wake up in the United States and we have zero tariffs across the board, and we're competing head on head with those old trade patterns beforehand that had their areas of efficiency, and the capital investment is lost. So, like I said, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying long-term strategy means long-term strategy, and put a plan in place that you are doing your best to stick by to protect our investment and our income.
And be aware of the long-term, I think you're saying, Jack, be aware of the long-term risk.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got to try and look at going there, but what's the, if we were sitting in an office with the experts, then you'd be asking the question, well, if this plant is built and this happens, or this happens, or this happens, what's the consequences? Because I look at, because we're in Ukraine to a certain extent, I look at the McCain plant, the potato plant that they built in Russia. It is a $200 million plant. They had $100 million into it, and when Putin did what he did and started taking over some of the industries, they just walked away. They lost about $100 million. Yeah. You don't want to see that situation happen, but those are the risks that are there, and you really have to analyze that out to the point of what's the least risk for us and what's the best possibility.
But that point exactly in investing in Russia and then Putin doing what he did, and Jack talking about if a change in infrastructure would do the job. Fact of the matter is, Trump has actually shot himself on the foot with something he's actually trying to encourage. He's trying to encourage more investment in his own country, and yet the unpredictability that he's creating is what's going to drive everybody away from investing in their country, because they have no idea what's coming next.
Well, and I think the big thing on all of this stuff, if you move out of agriculture, we all are in politics in our little brains here, way more than I, and you maybe, Bob, but still, the issue really is what does the future hold? So here's a situation where all of the friends and allies of the United States now appear equally all enemies, and even the big enemies are just a little bit bigger enemy. So do we start to build a world order and leave the U.S. out of the meeting? Do you really start to build a world order and say, those 350 million Americans, yeah, they're getting their product produced for in the United States, But is everybody going to slap on tariffs? Are we really then going to say there'll be a Europe? There'll be all those other ones. There'll be a Asia bloc and we'll all trade together. I mean, that I think is the real big downside risk for the United States. I mean, take NATO, for example. I'm ex-military. You know, what they've done to NATO has created a situation where the European Union is designing a European army to defend itself so nobody can veto the NATO, everybody come to defend each other, okay? So, you know, at some point, if that carries on, we're talking to Europe for defense. We just bought an Australian radar system, not a US radar system. So if this keeps unraveling, there'll be a point where you wake up in the morning and say, like, we actually are designing a world where we're trying to avoid the United States wherever possible because we don't trust them, to Wayne's point. And that is a sad day because, I mean, they've given up the influence. They've given up the position of being the world democratic leader and trying to do the right thing and make the world a better place to, we're just in it for ourselves and everybody else. That just allows this big hole for China to drive its transport through.
Which I think Jack makes the point that it is absolutely critical that members of both parties start to stand up in caucus in Congress and say, this just can't continue this way. Look at NORAD, and you would know all about NORAD. I've been at NORAD headquarters. The vice commander at NORAD is a Canadian. What's going to happen? That relationship, if this continues and the trust continues to deteriorate, we have to get. Hopefully, we can come back somewhat to having the United States as a partner in so many of these things because it matters so much. Yeah. And the thing that I see happening, Bob, is, you know, the other big player in the world now is China. In the West, in the West, most of the Western countries, we think in a 4-year time frame, political time frame. China thinks in a century time frame, and they're not involved in wars. They're plodding along. There are innovation parks in China, and I've been at them in Taiwan and one in China. They're unbelievable in terms of their size, and they're using artificial intelligence, automation. They're on the ball in terms of looking to the future and making progress. There's one innovation park in China that's 425 football fields big. They're bringing out more engineers out of their university system than the rest of us put together. So, and here we have United States going the other way and basically reverting back to the past. I just don't get it. So I'm hoping that Congress will eventually stand up and say, look, we've gone too far. We've got to try and rebuild these relationships. But the thing that worries me right now is, yes, he canceled the tariffs for 90 days, and because countries are coming to him and let's make a deal. He thinks he's in a TV show, and are those countries going to come and compromise and compromise and compromise? I don't know. But this is the real world, President Trump, I'd say. This is no longer a TV show.
Well, he was claiming that 50 countries phoned him on bended knee to try to make a deal, but I doubt whether that can be verified. Jack was talking about isolating the U.S. I mean, that would cost a lot, especially from Canada's standpoint, but you would think that there would be those in government, Wayne, that would be a little afraid of that. I mean, I'm hearing people talk about the U.S. as a economic superpower in the past tense. And that's what's going to happen more and more if they continue to have these isolationist policies. Jack, you'd like to say something?
It's not... Let me go to the military just for a second, because I've been watching to see what's going on with this kind of F-35. And then we have, for example, that's $1 trillion industry down in the United States. Portugal's canceled the contract. Colombia's canceled it. These are all small contracts. Canada's thinking about what it's going to do. All of Europe is thinking, even though they've got some of them, they're not going to buy nearly as many more. So that's just one example. We have France coming over to do cold water trials with submarines in the Arctic. Well, everybody thought we were buying them from the United States. Australia canceled the submarine contract with the US a year ago. I mean, this goes unravels. We have every European country saying they're going to double their military budget and they're going to spend it at home in Europe, building their armament industry up because they don't trust the United States will come to help them if they're invaded. So they better build tank plants. I mean, the list of things go on. So after how many years of doing that, do you just stop worrying about buying something from the United States? Unless it's convenient or unless it's at the right price. But when people start to change the way they think based on a set of feelings they have and facts, then it starts to build its own momentum. And that's the part, to what Wayne and I were saying, I mean, that's the part you start worrying about, of them eroding their position of authority. And some other country, which is a communist country, which isn't necessarily the friend of the global marketplace from a democracy point of view and a development point of view, the way we understand, all of that's now on the table as well. So to Wayne's point, we need the U.S. citizens and Congress and Senate to say, we haven't destroyed everything yet, but we really have to put a stop on this, and we have to change the way we're treating our friends, allies, and neighbors, or serious long-term damage could be there.
And the other thing that's happening, and it was in the press today, and I've heard about it a while ago, is there's been a lot more patriotic Canadians recently than there has been in my lifetime. But Delta Airlines is canceling some of their flights because people are not flying from Canada to the United States. Huge move. They're changing their whole flight pattern strategy because Canadians are no longer going to the U.S. or people from Europe going to the U.S. So this has implications right down to the personal citizen level, not just about commodities and goods and services, but it's right down to the personal level by people themselves globally, including in Canada.
Okay, gentlemen, one last question. As far as the Canada-U.S. trade dynamic is concerned, and if we could get the U.S. administration to settle down, would a customs union be the answer?
Well, I guess the question would be to what advantage are you proposing that? My understanding is you would have to have some currency controls. You would have a whole bunch of other things. You would have a much more integrated economy. I personally don't think the Canadian population is interested right now in a more integrated economy with the United States. It's the old thing, if you've touched the hot stove once, you're not going to do it again until you forgot about what it feels like. So I think deeper integration is off the table totally, in my view. I think we'll have to start with reestablishing. I think we'll have to start with what does it mean when somebody breaks a deal? And that's got to be in legislation. Because we thought we had deals that when people broke the deal, you put a panel in place, you had a semi-court judicial system, it found on the outcome as to who's right and who's wrong, and countervail duties were applied. So there was a system. Well, when you throw that system out, what would be the next system that would be trusted by people, and how and who would regulate, and how and who would put penalties on, and would the U.S. accept that? And if you can't get that sorted, Bob, you don't negotiate anything of value away on the table. I mean, you maybe have a couple of meetings in a nice hotel, and then you go back home. I mean, I'm serious. You're like, who would sit down and say, we'll open this market up to you guys in return for X, when you can't even have any sense of confidence that that means anything to anybody?
Well, and I mean, Canada has always prided itself on supporting a robust rules-based trading system. And I think we have to get it all back to that, and maybe the best way is to hunker down and wait it out. Wayne?
Yeah. We tend to talk about trade deals, but and so all trust has been lost there in terms of trade deal is no longer. It don't matter whether it breaks the rules or not. Trump's not going to abide by it. That's basically what's happened. But it isn't only trade deals. It's as Jack mentioned earlier, NATO, uh, where you have this military alliance, where the only country where Article 5 was really used in terms of NATO was to help the United States out after 9/11. They're the only country where Article 5 was triggered. And so you're even breaking an agreement or an alliance like that, where, do we trust at the moment providing in terms of the Five Eyes, sending secret information between, like I used to see that as Solicitor General, that information, and do you trust sending that information to the United States now because of the new relationship he seems to have with Putin? And what happened over the Signals episode the other day in terms of secret information been shared on a non-secure platform? So there's a lot at stake here, and once you lose, in my view, your word is everything. It doesn't even have to be on paper. Your word is everything. And if we signed an agreement with the United States today that we're back to the normal fashion, I would have a queasy feeling in my stomach. Is this really going to last? Can this be just broken with the stroke of a pen? Because this guy who is the head of the most powerful nation in the world decides, well, there's not enough in it for me. I didn't win enough. And so that trust is really, really severely broken. One other thing I wanted to mention, I should have mentioned earlier. U.S. dollar has always been the currency. Well, Brazil and China, I think it's Brazil, might have been Argentina, but either one of them signed an agreement with China the few weeks ago that they're going to use their own local currency. Whew, that is quite a move. If the United States dollar isn't the currency that's the foundation for the world any longer, then that is going to be a very substantial change. And that is the risk that they're starting to run. My view, I think we got to go as much as we can to multilateral negotiations and multilateral trade agreements where we got some security around the world in terms of how we trade services and goods. That's where I'd like to see us go, but we'll see what happens.
By multilateral, you mean bilateral or trilateral, or do you actually mean the WTO?
Multilateral WTO. You'll no doubt have bilateral ones as well, but I'd love to see us back to where there's global trading rules that make a difference.
And I think we have
ideal. Go ahead, Jack.
And with that, Wayne, we have to write into the rules. And this is sounding pretty flippant, but you have to put a clause, and if one of the partners doesn't follow the rules, what happens? Right in the deal, that everybody just cuts off trade with them, period, or something. There's got to be something of substance there so that the rest of us can keep functioning. The rest of us are not held ransom. But Bob, further to the point, and Wayne, you know this better, look what happened, for example, in Ukraine when the radar satellite system got turned off for 2 or 3 days, and the Russians invaded and took back in the Kursk district because the Ukrainians were absolutely blind. So who wants to have a defense pact like that with somebody? These things, and I heard, Wayne, that it was all the BRICS countries were looking at an alternative currency to the U.S. dollar. So it would be, Brazil, India, Russia, South Africa, etc. So the consequences are big time. I really hope Canadian government, when we have a new one, will talk to all the allies to put pressure on, not to go over and whine and negotiate with Trump over tariffs, but to put pressure on the United States to come back into the big tent and let's have a serious conversation about how we move forward and how we start to rebuild trust. Because otherwise, nothing works.
Well, you gentlemen have said it very well, and I think I also heard both of you say that with the collective patriotism, the collective indignation, and the collective foot stomping we've had in Canada with regard to how the U.S. is going about this, why would we offer them anything unless we have some confidence and some trust that they will hold up to a deal? So thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about this in the near future, but thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care, guys. Take care. All the best.